You know what they say about family? Blood is thicker than water. But sometimes that blood runs cold, doesn't it? Let me tell you about the day I wasn't invited to my own son's wedding, and how I showed up anyway and changed everything. But before we get to that moment, that incredible moment when everyone stood up as I walked into that church, let me start from the very beginning. Because this story, honey, this story is about so much more than just one wedding day. This is a story about love, loss, betrayal, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. Hi, my name is Margaret Rose Sullivan, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 81 years old now, sitting here in my little house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, looking out at the maple tree my late husband, Thomas, planted 43 years ago when our youngest son, Daniel, was just 5 years old. This house, these walls, they've seen everything. The laughter, the tears, the family dinners, the birthday parties, the graduations, the arguments, the reconciliations, and yes, the heartbreak too. Every scratch on the hardwood floors, every mark on the door frame where we measured the kids' heights, every photograph on these walls tells a story. And today, I'm going to tell you mine. I was born in 1943, right in the middle of World War II, to a farming family in rural Iowa. My daddy was too old to fight, thank the Lord, but we did our part for the war effort. We grew corn and soybeans, raised chickens and hogs, and my mama took in sewing work from the ladies in town who needed their clothes mended or altered. Money was tight, like it was for most folks back then, but we never went hungry, and we always had a roof over our heads. I was the youngest of 5 children, 4 boys, and then me, the baby girl. And let me tell you, growing up with 4 older brothers taught me real quick how to stand up for myself, how to throw a punch when necessary, and how to hold my own in any argument. That strength, that backbone, would come in handy later in life, though I didn't know it then. My childhood was simple but happy. We worked hard on the farm, did our chores without complaining, went to church every Sunday without fail, and gathered around the dinner table every single night as a family. My mama was a strong woman, strong in her faith and strong in her love for her family. She taught me how to cook, how to sew, how to can vegetables for the winter, and most importantly, how to love my family fiercely and unconditionally. My daddy was a quiet man, a man of few words but deep feelings, and he taught me the value of hard work, integrity, and keeping your word no matter what. Those lessons, those values, they shaped who I became. I married my Thomas in 1962, just shy of my 19th birthday. People got married young back then. It was just what you did. You finished high school, maybe worked for a year or 2, and then you got married and started a family. Thomas was 21, tall and handsome with dark hair and the kindest brown eyes you ever saw. We met at a church social, and I knew the first time I danced with him that he was the one I was going to marry. He was a kind man, gentle but strong, with hands that could fix anything, and a heart bigger than the whole state of Iowa. He proposed to me on Christmas Eve, 1961, right there in my parents' living room with my whole family watching, and I said yes before he even finished asking the question. We got married on a cold February day in 1962 in the same little country church where I'd been baptized as a baby. It was a simple wedding. I wore my mama's wedding dress, altered to fit me, and carried a bouquet of silk flowers because fresh flowers were too expensive and impossible to find in February anyway. We had a small reception in the church basement with sandwiches and punch and a 2-tier cake that my mama's sister made. There were maybe 50 people there, all family and close friends, and it was perfect. It was everything I'd ever wanted. Thomas worked at the John Deere factory in Cedar Rapids for 37 years, starting on the assembly line and working his way up to floor supervisor. It was hard work, physical work, and he came home every night tired and sore, but he never complained. Not once. He provided for his family, and that gave him pride. I worked as a school secretary at Cedar Rapids Elementary for 32 years before. I retired in 2008. I loved that job, loved being around the children, loved being part of their lives and watching them grow up year after year. The pay wasn't much, but between Thomas's salary and mine, we managed to buy this little house in 1965, and we scrimped and saved and built a good life together. We had 3 children, and each one of them was a blessing. 3 beautiful babies that I brought into this world with hope and love, and dreams for their futures. Sarah came first in 1963, just 10 months after we got married. She was a beautiful baby with Thomas's dark hair and my green eyes, and she came into this world screaming, and she never really stopped. Sarah was fierce from the very beginning, independent and strong-willed, and she kept me on my toes every single day of her childhood. Then Michael came along in 1966, my rough and tumble boy, who was always covered in dirt and scraped knees and adventure. He was all boy, that one, loud and energetic and full of life. And finally, my baby, my Daniel, was born in 1970. Daniel was my surprise baby, my blessing, my gentle soul. Daniel was different from the other two from the very start. Where Sarah was fierce and Michael was wild, Daniel was sensitive and thoughtful. He was the child who cried when he saw a dead bird on the sidewalk, who brought home stray cats and begged to keep them, who sat for hours drawing pictures and making up elaborate stories. He was my dreamer, my artist, my tender-hearted boy. I used to sit on the edge of his bed at night, and he'd tell me these incredible stories about knights and dragons and magical kingdoms where good always triumphed over evil and everyone lived happily ever after. His imagination was just beautiful, pure and innocent and full of wonder. Thomas and I, we supported all our kids in everything they wanted to do. We believed that every child was different, that each one had their own path to follow, and our job as parents was to guide them and support them and love them unconditionally, no matter what direction they chose. When Sarah announced at 16 that she wanted to be a lawyer, we encouraged her even though we knew the costs would be enormous, and we'd have to sacrifice to make it happen. When Michael decided he wanted to take over his uncle's small construction business instead of going to college, we supported that decision and co-signed his first business loan even though it scared us to death, to put our house up as collateral. And when Daniel told us in high school that he wanted to go to art school, that he wanted to be a graphic designer, Thomas had his doubts about the practicality of an art degree, but we found a way to make it work. We took out a second mortgage on the house, and I picked up extra hours at the school, and Daniel went to the Art Institute in Des Moines. All three of our children grew up strong and capable and ready to face the world. Sarah became a successful lawyer, specializing in family law, and she was fierce in the courtroom, fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Michael's construction business thrived, and he became known throughout Cedar Rapids for quality work at fair prices. And Daniel, my artistic Daniel, he graduated from art school and got a job as a graphic designer in Des Moines, working for a marketing firm, making good money, designing logos and websites and advertising materials for businesses all over Iowa. We were so proud of all three of them, so proud of the adults they'd become. Daniel met Jennifer in 2003, when he was 33 years old. He called me one evening, so excited he could barely get the words out, telling me he'd met someone special, someone amazing, someone he thought might be the one. He'd met her at a work conference in Chicago. She was a pharmaceutical sales representative, working for one of the big drug companies, traveling all over the Midwest, selling medications to doctors' offices and hospitals. She made excellent money, drove a luxury car, wore designer clothes, and according to Daniel, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. I was thrilled for him. Daniel had dated here and there over the years, but nothing serious, nothing that lasted more than a few months. He'd always been a little shy, a little awkward around women, more comfortable with his sketchpad and his computer than with small talk and flirting. So when he told me he'd met someone, when I heard the joy and excitement in his voice, I was genuinely happy for him. My baby boy had found love. What more could a mother want? Daniel brought Jennifer home for the first time on a Sunday in September 2003 for our regular Sunday dinner. Sunday dinners were sacred in our house. Every single Sunday without fail, the whole family gathered at our table for a home-cooked meal. Sarah came with her husband Rick and their 2 kids. Michael came with his wife Teresa and their 3 kids. And now Daniel was bringing Jennifer. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to welcome her into our family with open arms and make her feel like she belonged. I spent all day Saturday cleaning the house from top to bottom, even though it was already clean. I washed all the windows, scrubbed all the floors, dusted every surface, and arranged fresh flowers from my garden in vases throughout the house. On Sunday morning, I got up early and started cooking. I made my special pot roast, the one all my kids had loved since they were little, with carrots and potatoes and onions all roasting together in the Dutch oven, and that rich, savory gravy that Thomas said could make you weep with joy. I made homemade rolls, creamy mashed potatoes, green beans from my garden, and a chocolate cake for dessert because Daniel had mentioned that Jennifer loved chocolate. I set out my good china, the set that had been my grandmother's, brought over from Germany in 1890, and I put fresh linens on the table and polished the silverware until it gleamed. Thomas came up behind me in the kitchen that afternoon as I was checking the roast and wrapped his arms around me. "You're going to wear yourself out, Maggie," he said softly. "It's just dinner." "It's not just dinner," I told him. "It's the first time Daniel's bringing a girl home to meet us. I want her to feel welcome. I want her to see what kind of family she might be joining." "She'll love you," Thomas said, kissing my cheek. How could she not? If only he'd been right. Jennifer arrived with Daniel at exactly 2 p.m. She was beautiful. I'll give her that. Tall and slender with long blonde hair styled in perfect waves, flawless makeup, and an outfit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in an entire year. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse, tailored black pants, and black high heels that clicked on my hardwood floors as she walked. She had perfectly manicured nails, expensive jewelry, and she carried a designer handbag that I recognized from a magazine I'd seen at the grocery store checkout. Everything about her screamed money and sophistication. "Mom, Dad," Daniel said, his face glowing with pride and happiness. "This is Jennifer. Jennifer, these are my parents, Margaret and Thomas." "Call me Maggie," I said warmly, reaching out to hug her. "Everyone does. We're so happy to meet you. Daniel's told us so much about you." Jennifer accepted my hug, but it was stiff and brief, barely a touch of her body against mine before she pulled away. "It's nice to meet you," she said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What a cozy home you have." Cozy. The way she said it, it didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like she was really saying small or cramped or beneath my standards. But I told myself I was being oversensitive, reading too much into it. She was probably just nervous, meeting Daniel's family for the first time. I knew I should give her the benefit of the doubt. Thomas shook her hand warmly and asked about her drive down from Des Moines. Sarah and Michael and their families were already there, the kids running around playing in the backyard. And I introduced Jennifer to everyone. She was polite, shaking hands and smiling, but there was something in her demeanor, something cool and distant, like she was observing us from behind a glass wall rather than actually engaging with us. We all sat down to dinner. The dining room table extended to its full length to accommodate everyone. I'd put Jennifer and Daniel at one end next to Thomas and me, so we could talk and get to know her better. I served the pot roast, making sure everyone got plenty, and passed around the potatoes and vegetables and rolls. Everyone dug in enthusiastically except Jennifer. She took tiny portions of everything, and then she just pushed the food around on her plate, cutting it into smaller pieces but not really eating it. "Is everything okay?" I asked her after a few minutes. "Is the roast not to your liking? I can make you something else if you'd prefer." "Oh no, it's lovely," Jennifer said with that same tight smile. "It's just, I'm watching my carbs. And my trainer has me on a pretty strict meal plan right now, but it looks delicious, really." "Your trainer?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. "My personal trainer," Jennifer explained. "I work out with him 5 days a week. You have to stay in shape in my line of work. Image is everything in pharmaceutical sales. Doctors are more likely to buy from sales reps who are attractive and well-maintained. Well-maintained. Like she was a car or a piece of machinery rather than a human being. I found it sad, to be honest, but I didn't say anything. Different strokes for different folks, as they say. Then Jennifer launched into a lengthy description of the expensive restaurant in Des Moines where she and Daniel had gone for dinner the previous week. She described every course in detail, the appetizer, the soup, the salad, the main course, the dessert, and the wine pairing that went with each course, and how the chef had come out personally to ask how they'd enjoyed their meal, and how the whole experience had cost nearly $300. But it was worth it, because it was such an incredible culinary journey. The way she told the story, it felt like she was trying to show us what real food was supposed to be, what a real dining experience looked like, how our simple family dinner couldn't possibly compare. Sarah caught my eye across the table and raised her eyebrows ever so slightly. Michael was focused on his plate, shoveling food in like he always did. But his wife Teresa looked uncomfortable. Thomas squeezed my hand under the table. He knew. He always knew what I was feeling. The afternoon progressed awkwardly. After dinner, the kids wanted to show Daniel their latest school projects and test scores and drawings, like they always did. Daniel was the fun uncle, the one who really looked at their art and praised their creativity and made them feel special. But Jennifer kept checking her watch and her phone, making comments about how they should probably get back to Des Moines soon because she had an early meeting in the morning. When Michael's youngest son, who was 7 at the time, tried to show Jennifer a drawing he'd made of a dinosaur, she barely glanced at it before saying, "That's nice, sweetie," and turning back to her phone. When they finally left around 5 p.m., Jennifer thanked us politely but perfunctorily, like she was checking an obligation off a list. Daniel hugged me tight and whispered, "Thanks, Mom. I know she was nervous, but I think it went well, don't you?" I forced a smile. "Of course, honey. She seems very nice." After they'd gone, Sarah exploded. "Did you see the way she looked at this house? At us? Like we were beneath her? And that whole story about the fancy restaurant? That was a direct dig at your cooking, Mom. She was basically saying your pot roast wasn't good enough for her refined palate." "Maybe she was just nervous," I said weakly, even though I'd thought the same things. "First impressions aren't always accurate." "My gut says she's trouble," Michael said bluntly. "She's got Danny wrapped around her finger, and she looks at the rest of us like we're dirt on her designer shoes." Thomas was quiet, which meant he agreed but didn't want to say it out loud. That night, lying in bed in the dark, he finally said, "I don't think she's good for our boy, Maggie. But he loves her, and all we can do is love him and support his choices and hope he sees the truth before it's too late." "And what if he doesn't?" I whispered. "What if he marries her?" "Then we love her too," Thomas said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. "We love her because he loves her, and we pray that either she changes or he comes to his senses." They got engaged in December 2003, just 3 months after that first Sunday dinner. Daniel called to tell us, so excited and happy, talking a mile a minute about how he'd proposed at that fancy restaurant, how he'd arranged with the chef to have the ring hidden in her dessert, how she'd cried and said yes immediately. I was happy for him because he was happy, but my heart was heavy. I could see the writing on the wall. I could see what was coming, though I didn't know exactly how bad it would get. They got married in June 2004 at the most expensive venue in Des Moines. The wedding was extravagant, over the top really, like something you'd see in a magazine. Jennifer's parents paid for most of it. Her father owned a chain of successful car dealerships across Iowa and had plenty of money to spare. There were ice sculptures, a 7-tier wedding cake, champagne fountains, a live band, and 250 guests. The venue itself was this gorgeous, historic mansion with marble floors and crystal chandeliers and manicured gardens. Everything was white and gold and ivory, elegant and expensive and impressive. I wore the best dress I owned, a nice navy blue dress with a matching jacket that I'd bought for Sarah's wedding 3 years earlier. It was a good dress, appropriate and tasteful, and I'd had it dry cleaned and pressed. I felt good in it when I left the house, but the moment I walked into that venue and saw what everyone else was wearing, designer gowns and expensive suits and jewelry that probably cost more than my car, I felt instantly out of place, like a country mouse at a city ball. Jennifer's mother took one look at me and actually said, "Oh, Margaret, you're wearing that?" Then she laughed, this tinkling little laugh, and added, "Well, I suppose navy is a safe choice." So classic. The way she said classic, she might as well have said outdated or boring or poor. I held my head high and smiled. "Thank you, Diane. You look lovely as well." And she did. In her champagne-colored, designer gown that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. I saw Diane whisper something to Jennifer, who was across the room in her wedding dress doing photos, and they both glanced at me and then laughed together. This shared moment of superiority at my expense. It stung, but I refused to let it show. I'd raised my son with love and values and integrity, and that was worth more than all the designer dresses and fancy venues in the world. That's what I told myself anyway. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll admit that. Jennifer looked stunning in her dress, and Daniel looked so handsome in his tuxedo, and when they said their vows, he had tears in his eyes. He really loved her. I could see it. And I prayed that love would be enough, that it would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. At the reception, the seating arrangements told me everything. I needed to know about where Thomas and I ranked in Jennifer's world. We were seated at a table in the back, near the kitchen, with some distant relatives of Jennifer's that we'd never met and would never see again. Sarah and Michael and their families were at different tables, also in the back. Meanwhile, Jennifer's family and friends were at the front tables near the head table, in positions of honor. It was a small thing, really, just a seating arrangement, but it spoke volumes about how Jennifer viewed our family. We weren't important enough to be showcased. We were to be hidden away, minimized, kept out of sight. Thomas noticed too. He squeezed my hand and said quietly, "It's just one day, Maggie. Let them have their day." But it wasn't just one day. It was the beginning of a pattern that would continue for the next 11 years. The first few years of their marriage, Daniel still came around regularly. He and Jennifer lived in an upscale condo in Des Moines, about 2 hours from Cedar Rapids, but Daniel made the drive for Sunday dinners most weeks. He'd call me during the week just to chat, tell me about work, ask for advice about married life. Jennifer would come with him sometimes, but more often than not, she had an excuse. She was tired. She had work to catch up on. She was going to the gym. She had plans with her own family. When she did come, she'd sit at our table with this expression of patient endurance, like she was tolerating our company rather than enjoying it. She'd check her phone constantly, sometimes actually texting during dinner, which I found incredibly rude, though I never said anything. Slowly, gradually, like a fog rolling in so thick, you don't notice it until you can't see. Your hand in front of your face. Daniel started coming around less often. First, they started missing occasional Sunday dinners. Daniel would call and apologize, saying they had other plans. They were visiting Jennifer's parents. They had a work thing. They were going out of town for the weekend. Then it was every other Sunday. Then once a month. Then only on major holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter. And Jennifer always had a reason. Always. They had plans with her family. They had a work event. They were traveling. They were tired. They needed to focus on their marriage and their own life together. Every excuse was reasonable on its own. But collectively, they added up to one undeniable truth. Jennifer was pulling Daniel away from his family. Thomas noticed it, but he was a man of few words and few complaints. He believed in letting people live their own lives and make their own mistakes. But one night in 2009, lying in bed in the darkness, he said to me, "Maggie, we're losing our boy." "I know," I whispered back, tears rolling down my cheeks into my pillow, hot and silent. "I know, and I don't know how to stop it. I don't know what to do." "Maybe we can't stop it," Thomas said, and I heard his voice crack just a little, which broke my heart because Thomas never cried, never showed that kind of vulnerability. Maybe all we can do is love him and wait for him to find his way back. Maybe that's all any parent can do. But what if he doesn't find his way back? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if he just drifts further and further away until he's gone completely? Then we keep the light on, Thomas said firmly, reaching over to hold my hand in the darkness. We keep the door open and the light on, and we make sure he knows that no matter what, no matter how much time passes, he's always welcome here, he's always loved here, this is always his home. That was in 2009. By early 2010, Thomas started having stomach pains. At first, he dismissed them as indigestion or stress or just getting older. He was 69 years old, and he'd always been healthy as a horse, never sick, never complaining. But the pains got worse and he started losing weight. And finally, I insisted he see a doctor. The diagnosis came in March 2010, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, advanced, aggressive. The doctor gave him 6 months to live, maybe less. The world stopped. Everything just stopped. Thomas, my partner, my love, my best friend for 48 years was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The cancer was too advanced for surgery, and chemotherapy would only buy us a little time while making him miserable. We decided together to forgo aggressive treatment and focus on quality of life. We wanted whatever time we had left together to be good time, not time spent in hospitals and doctors, offices fighting a battle we couldn't win. I called all 3 kids immediately to tell them. Sarah rushed over right away, and Michael came that evening after work. Daniel called back an hour later. He'd been in a meeting and had his phone off. When I told him about his father's diagnosis, he broke down crying, sobbing on the phone like his heart was breaking. "I'm coming home," he said. "I'm coming right now, today." "Tomorrow is fine, honey," I told him gently. "Your dad's okay right now. He's resting. Come tomorrow and spend some time with him." Daniel came the next day without Jennifer. He spent hours with his father, and they talked about everything and nothing. Thomas, who'd never been much for emotional conversations, told Daniel how proud he was of him, how much he loved him, how he hoped Daniel would live a good life and be happy and remember. What was really important, Daniel cried and promised to come around more, to be there for me after Dad was gone, to be a better son. Jennifer finally came to visit 2 weeks later, and she stayed for exactly 45 minutes. She sat stiffly in our living room looking uncomfortable, making small talk about the weather and traffic, and checking her watch repeatedly. When they left, she gave me a brief hug and said, "Let us know if there's anything we can do," in that tone people use when they're saying what they're supposed to say, but don't really mean it. Thomas lived for 8 months, not 6. He fought hard, harder than the doctors expected, because he wanted as much time with his family as possible. Sarah came over almost every day. Michael came several times a week. Daniel came occasionally, maybe once every 2 weeks at first, then once a month, then every few weeks. He always had a reason. Work was busy. Jennifer wasn't feeling well. They had plans they couldn't cancel. And I understood, or I tried to understand, because death is hard, and watching your father die slowly is even harder. Some people can't handle it. Some people cope by staying away. But it hurt. God, it hurt. I was losing my husband, watching him fade away day by day, and my youngest son couldn't seem to find the time to be there consistently. Sarah and Michael were there, holding my hand, helping me take care of their father, being present in our grief. But Daniel kept his distance, and I knew it was Jennifer influencing him, telling him it was too hard, too depressing, too much to deal with, encouraging him to focus on his own life, rather than spending time with his dying father. Thomas died on March 15th, 2011, in our bedroom, in the bed we'd shared for 48 years, with me holding his hand. Sarah was there, and Michael was there, and we called Daniel right away. He was at work. He said he'd come right away. But by the time he got there, 2 hours later, his father was already gone. I'll never forget the look on Daniel's face when he walked into that room and saw his father's body lying there, still and cold and empty. He broke down completely, falling to his knees beside the bed, grabbing his father's hand and crying, "I'm sorry, Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have been here." I knelt down beside him and held him while he cried. This grown man who was my baby boy. And I said he knew you loved him. He knew. But I wasn't sure that was enough. And I wasn't sure Daniel believed it either. The funeral was 3 days later, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. We had it at our church. The same church where Thomas and I had been married 49 years earlier. The same church where all 3 of our children had been baptized. The church was packed with people who loved Thomas, his co-workers from John Deere, neighbors, friends from our quilting circle and his bowling league, my former co-workers from the elementary school. Everyone had a story about Thomas, about his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. Daniel gave the eulogy, and he did a beautiful job, talking about his father's love for his family, his work ethic, his sense of humor, his devotion to his wife and children. He cried through parts of it, and I was proud of him for being vulnerable and honest about his grief. Jennifer sat in the front pew in a black designer dress and oversized sunglasses, her phone in her lap, and I saw her check it several times during the service. At my husband's funeral, she was checking her phone at my husband's funeral. At the wake afterward, back at our house. My house now, I suppose. Though it felt so empty and wrong without Thomas there. People filled every room, sharing stories and memories, eating the food that the church ladies had prepared, offering condolences and support. Daniel stayed close to me for most of it, and for a few hours, it felt like I had my son back, like he was present and engaged and part of the family again. But Jennifer stood off to the side, talking on her phone, and I saw her gesture to Daniel several times, clearly wanting to leave. As people were starting to go, Daniel pulled me aside into the kitchen, away from everyone else. He took both my hands in his and looked me in the eye, and he said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't here more during Dad's illness. I'm sorry I wasn't here when he died. I should have been better. I should have been here." "You're here now," I said, squeezing his hands. "That's what matters." "I'm going to do better," he said intensely. "I promise you, Mom. I'm going to come around more. I'm going to be here for you. Dad would have wanted that. I'm going to be the son you deserve." I held on to that promise like a lifeline, like a rope thrown to someone drowning. For about 3 weeks, it seemed like maybe things would change. Daniel called several times, asking how I was doing, if I needed anything. He came over for dinner one Sunday. He texted me pictures of funny things he saw that he thought would make me smile, and I started to hope. I started to believe that maybe Thomas's death would be the wake-up call Daniel needed. Maybe losing his father would make him realize how precious family is, how short life is, how important it is to cherish the people you love while you still have them. But then the calls became less frequent. The visits stopped. The texts tapered off, and when I'd call him, when I'd reach out, half the time he wouldn't answer. The calls would go to voicemail, and he'd text back later saying he was busy. He'd call me back soon. He was in a meeting. He was out with Jennifer. When he did answer, the conversations were brief and distracted. I could hear Jennifer in the background sometimes, could hear her voice, though I couldn't make out what she was saying. "Just busy with work, Mom," he'd tell me, his voice apologetic but distant. "You know how it is. Things have been crazy at the office, but I didn't know how it was. When I was working full-time and raising 3 children and taking care of a household, I still made time for my mama. I called her every single day, until she passed away in 1995 at the age of 92. Every single day, without fail, I called my mama. But I couldn't say that to Daniel without sounding accusatory, without sounding like I was guilt-tripping him, without pushing him further away. So I swallowed my hurt and said I understood, and I told him I loved him, and I hoped that eventually things would change. Sarah saw what was happening. She'd come over for coffee, which she did several times a week after. Thomas died because she was worried about me being alone, and she'd find me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, willing it to ring. "Mama," she said to me one Saturday morning about 6 months after Thomas died, "you can't let this eat you up. Danny's making his choices. You can't control him." "But why?" I asked her, and I wasn't ashamed of the tears that sprang to my eyes. What did I do wrong? How did I lose my son? I don't understand what happened. One day he was my Danny, and then he married her, and now he's just gone. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm and warm and grounding. "You didn't lose him, Mama, and you didn't do anything wrong. This is on Danny, and it's on Jennifer. She's never thought we were good enough for her precious upscale life. I've heard her, you know, when she doesn't know I'm listening. I was at their condo once for a holiday party, and I heard her talking to her friends about Daniel's towny family and how embarrassing we are. She literally called us embarrassing, Mama. The truth hurt, but I'd suspected it all along. Still, hearing it said out loud, hearing it confirmed, was like a knife twisting in my heart. Does Daniel know she talks about us that way? I don't know, Sarah admitted. If he does, he's choosing to ignore it. Or maybe she's convinced him that we really are beneath them, that we're holding him back somehow. She's got her claws in deep. Mama, she's spent years slowly turning him against us, so gradually that he probably doesn't even realize it's happening. Michael tried to talk to Daniel about it once. The boys met up for beers at a sports bar in Des Moines, and Michael, who'd never been one to beat around the bush, brought up how I was struggling after losing Dad, how I was lonely, how I could really use more family around. According to Michael, Daniel got defensive immediately. He said Jennifer had some valid points about boundaries, about building their own life as a married couple, about not being obligated to spend every free moment with extended family. He said they were busy with their careers and their social life and their own obligations. He said it wasn't personal, it was just about priorities and time management. When did loving your mother become an obligation? I asked Michael when he told me about this conversation, and my voice cracked with pain. When did spending time with the woman who gave birth to you and raised you and loved you unconditionally for 37 years become something you have to schedule around more important priorities? Michael just shook his head sadly. I don't know, Ma. I don't know what happened to him. That's not the brother I grew up with. That's not the kid who used to follow me around everywhere and look up to me like I hung the moon. Jennifer's changed him, and not for the better. The years passed, each one feeling longer and lonelier than the last. 2011 became 2012, became 2013, became 2014. I saw Daniel maybe once or twice a year, usually at major holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, and even then the visits were brief and awkward and painful. Jennifer barely spoke to me. She'd give me these stiff, obligatory hugs where our bodies barely touched, hugs that felt like duty rather than affection. And then she'd spend the rest of the visit on her phone or talking to Daniel in hushed tones about needing to leave soon. I tried everything I could think of to maintain a connection with my son. I invited them to dinner, offered to come to Des Moines to meet them at a restaurant, suggested meeting halfway between Cedar Rapids and Des Moines at a neutral location. I sent cards for every occasion: birthdays, anniversaries, Valentine's Day, Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, even random thinking of you cards when I saw something funny or sweet that reminded me of Daniel. I mailed him care packages with his favorite cookies, the chocolate chip cookies with walnuts that I'd been making since he was 5 years old, the ones he used to eat by the dozen. Sometimes he'd text back a brief thank you. Sometimes he wouldn't acknowledge them at all. The silence was deafening. Sarah told me I should stop trying, that I was just hurting myself, that I needed to accept that Daniel had moved on and build a life without him in it. "You're just torturing yourself, Mama," she said one day when she found me crying over another unanswered text message. "Every time you reach out and he doesn't respond, it's like you're ripping open the wound all over again. You need to let go, but how do you let go of your child? How do you stop loving someone just because they've stopped making time for you? How do you turn off 37 years of maternal love and devotion like it's a light switch?" I couldn't. I wouldn't. He was my son, my baby, and I would keep reaching out and keep hoping and keep loving him, even if he never loved me back the same way. I retired from my job at the elementary school in 2008, and after Thomas died, my days were long and quiet and sometimes unbearably lonely. The house that had once been full of life and noise and activity was now silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I joined a quilting circle at church, volunteered at the public library shelving books twice a week, took care of my garden, went to coffee with friends from church. I had Sarah and Michael and their families, and those relationships brought me joy and comfort. Sarah had 2 children, Emma and Jack, who were teenagers now and full of life and attitude. Michael had 3 children, the oldest in college and the 2 younger ones in high school. Those grandchildren brought me immense joy. They came over regularly, helped me with yard work and housework, sat with me to watch old movies, learned my recipes and family stories. But there was always this ache, this Daniel-shaped hole in my heart and my life. Every Sunday dinner without him felt incomplete. Every holiday without him felt hollow. Every milestone he missed, Emma's high school graduation, Jack's first car, Michael's oldest son getting accepted to college, was another reminder that he'd chosen. His wife swirled over his family. Then, in early February 2015, I got a phone call from Sarah. I was in my kitchen making soup for the church's food bank when my phone rang. The moment I heard Sarah's voice, I knew something was wrong. She had that tight, controlled tone she used when she was trying not to explode with anger. "Mama," she said, "are you sitting down?" My heart dropped into my stomach. "What's wrong? Is everyone okay? Did something happen?" "Everyone's fine, physically, but Mama, I have to tell you something. And you're not going to like it. Danny and Jennifer just sent out invitations for a vow renewal ceremony." I was confused. A vow renewal? But they've only been married 11 years. Isn't that something people do for their 25th or 50th anniversary? "Apparently not," Sarah said, and I could hear the anger simmering in her voice now. Apparently, Jennifer never thought their first wedding was good enough, so they're doing it all over again. Bigger and better and more expensive. They're calling it their real wedding, and having a huge ceremony with hundreds of guests. I sat down at my kitchen table, my legs suddenly weak. "Well," I said slowly, trying to process this information, "I suppose that's their choice. It seems a bit unnecessary to me, but if it makes them happy, when is it?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Too long, the kind of pause that signals bad news is coming. "Sarah," I prompted, "when is it?" "June 20th, she said quietly. 3.5 months from now. "June 20th, I repeated, my mind already starting to plan. "That doesn't give us much time, does it? I'll need to find something nice to wear. Maybe I should go shopping in Des Moines. Get something really special for the occasion. And I should probably—" "Mama." Sarah's voice cut through my planning, sharp and pained. "Mama, stop. You need to listen to me." Something in her tone made my blood run cold. "What is it?" "You're not invited." The world seemed to tilt sideways. The kitchen swam in my vision. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "What do you mean I'm not invited? That doesn't make any sense. I'm his mother. Of course I'm invited. There must be some mistake. Maybe the invitation got lost in the mail, or—" "It's not a mistake," Sarah said. And now I could hear that she was crying, her voice thick with tears and rage. "Michael got his invitation yesterday. I got mine this morning." We both called each other immediately, because neither of our invitations includes a +1 for our spouses or our kids. The invitations say adult guests only, and they're addressed specifically to each individual person they want there. "Your name isn't on the guest list, Mama. Neither are any of your grandchildren. Neither are Michael's wife, Teresa, or my husband, Rick." I couldn't breathe. The air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. "There must be some mistake," I said again, because my brain couldn't process what she was telling me. Daniel wouldn't do this. He wouldn't exclude me from his wedding. I'm his mother. I gave birth to him. I raised him. I loved him his whole life. He wouldn't. I called him, Sarah interrupted, her voice shaking now with fury. As soon as I got my invitation and realized you weren't included, I called Danny and demanded to know what was going on. I asked him point blank if you were invited to this vow renewal ceremony. And what did he say? I whispered, dreading the answer. He got quiet for a long time, so long I thought maybe the call had dropped. And then finally he said, Sarah had to stop and take a breath, like the words were physically painful to speak. He said that he and Jennifer had decided they wanted a fresh start, that this ceremony is about their future together, not the past, that they're only inviting people who are actively part of their present life. Those were his exact words, Mama, actively part of their present life. Each word was like a slap across the face. A fresh start. Without me. His mother was part of his past, not his present. I wasn't actively part of his life. And whose fault was that? Who had pushed me out, excluded me, made it impossible to be part of his life? But I'm his mother, I whispered. And I heard my voice crack and break like I was a little girl again instead of a 72-year-old woman who had survived childbirth 3 times and buried her husband and weathered countless storms in life. I'm his mother. I know, Sarah said, and she was openly crying now. I told him that. I told him exactly what I thought of him and his decision. I told him he was breaking your heart. I told him Dad would be absolutely ashamed of him, would be rolling over in his grave at the thought of his youngest son treating his mother this way. And you know what he said? What? He said I was being dramatic. He said you'd understand because you've always been supportive of his choices. Can you believe that? He's using your unconditional love and support against you. He's justifying excluding you from his wedding because you've never made waves, never caused problems, never demanded he choose between you and Jennifer. We were both crying now, Sarah and I, connected by phone, lines in grief and disbelief and a shared sense of outrage at the injustice of it all. Michael's not going, Sarah continued after we'd both collected ourselves a bit. He already called Daniel back and told him exactly where he could shove his invitation. He said he told Danny that he was ashamed to call him his brother and that as long as their mother wasn't welcome, Michael wanted nothing to do with him. And I'm not going either. Mama, I already told Daniel that if his own mother isn't good enough to be included in his fresh start, then neither am I. He can have his fancy vow renewal ceremony, but he'll have to do it without any of his real family there. No, I said immediately, even through my tears and pain. No, Sarah, you and Michael should go. You should be there for your brother, even if he doesn't want me there. He's still your brother. This is still important to him. To hell with that, Sarah said bluntly, and I was too upset to even scold her for her language. He doesn't get to pick and choose which family members are acceptable. It's all of us or none of us. And if you're not welcome, then I'm not going. Michael's not going. And that means Danny's own siblings won't be at his wedding. Maybe that'll make him think about what he's done. Maybe that'll wake him up. After we hung up, I sat at that kitchen table for hours. I watched the sunlight move across the kitchen floor as the afternoon turned to evening. I watched the shadows lengthen and darken. I watched the day die. And I thought about everything. Every choice I'd made as a mother. Every sacrifice Thomas and I had made for our children. Every moment of love and care and devotion I'd poured into Daniel's life. I thought about the night he was born. How Thomas and I had driven to the hospital at 2 a.m. How I'd labored for 14 hours before Daniel finally came into the world, red-faced and screaming and perfect. I thought about sitting up all night when he had croup at age 3, holding him in the steamy bathroom with the shower running hot, trying to help him breathe. Terrified we'd have to call an ambulance, but so relieved when his breathing finally eased. I thought about all the art supplies I'd bought him over the years, even when money was tight and we really couldn't afford it, because I wanted to nurture his creativity and his passion. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike, to tie his shoes, to read, to be kind to others, to stand up for what's right. I thought about defending his choice to go to art school when Thomas's brother said it was a waste of money and Daniel should learn a trade instead. I thought about the night before his first wedding, when he'd come to me nervous and scared, and I'd held his hands and told him that love was the bravest thing a person could do, that marriage was a gift, that he should cherish Jennifer and treat her well and build a good life together. And now, after all of that, after 37 years of being his mother, after giving him life and raising him and loving him unconditionally every single day of his existence, I wasn't good enough to witness his fresh start. I wasn't part of his present life. I was the past, something to be left behind, discarded, erased. I won't lie to you and say I handled it well at first. I didn't. I fell apart completely. I cried for days, deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere. So deep inside me, I didn't know that place existed. I stopped eating. Food tasted like ashes in my mouth, and I couldn't bring myself to care about nourishment. I stopped going to my quilting circle at church because I couldn't face having to explain to those kind ladies why I was so devastated. I stopped my volunteer shifts at the library because I couldn't concentrate on shelving books. When my heart was shattered into a million pieces, I just sat in my house in the home Thomas and I had built together, and I grieved for my lost son like he had died. Sarah and Michael came over constantly, bringing food I didn't eat, bringing love I couldn't quite feel through the numbness, bringing outrage on my behalf that would have felt good if I could feel anything at all. They alternated days, making sure I was never alone for too long, checking on me like I was a fragile thing that might break, completely if left unsupervised. And maybe I was. Maybe that's exactly what. I was in those first weeks, broken and fragile and barely holding myself together. We should crash the wedding, Michael said one afternoon, half joking but half serious, sitting at my kitchen table with his arms crossed and his face dark with anger. Just show up uninvited and make a huge scene. Stand up during the ceremony and object. Tell everyone there exactly what kind of son excludes his own mother from his wedding. No, I said quietly, firmly, the first definite thing I'd said in days. No, Michael, I won't do that. I won't stoop to that level. I won't embarrass him or cause a scene or ruin his day, even if he's willing to break my heart. That's not who I am. That's not who your father raised us to be. Then what are you going to do? Michael demanded, frustrated by my passivity. Just sit here and take it? Just accept that he's cutting you out of his life and do nothing? I don't know yet, I admitted. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to be vindictive or cruel or petty, even if he is. But Sarah, my fierce Sarah, my warrior daughter, she had a different idea. She came over about 2 weeks after I'd learned about the wedding, and she had that look in her eyes that she used to get as a little girl when she was planning something big. It was the same look she'd had when she'd organized a neighborhood petition to save the old oak tree on our street from being cut down. The same look she'd had when she'd challenged a bad grade in high school and got the teacher to admit their mistake. The same look she'd had when she'd argued her first case in court and won. Mama, she said, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table and taking both my hands in hers, I've been thinking about this situation nonstop, and I have an idea. You didn't get an invitation, that's true, but that doesn't mean you can't go to the ceremony. I shook my head. Sarah, I'm not going to crash the wedding. I just told Michael. Not crash, she interrupted. Attend. There's a big difference. Think about it, Mama. This is a church wedding, right? Daniel and Jennifer are having the ceremony at St. Catherine's Church in Des Moines, that big fancy Catholic church where all of Jennifer's family goes, and churches are public places. Anyone can sit in a church during a wedding. You don't need an invitation to sit in a house of God and witness a sacrament. I stared at her, my mind trying to wrap around what she was suggesting. You want me to just show up without an invitation, knowing they explicitly excluded me? I want you to stand up for yourself, Sarah said intensely, squeezing my hands. I want you to remind Daniel that you exist, that you're his mother, and that you can't be erased. Just because Jennifer decided we're not fancy enough for her new life. You go to that church, you sit in a pew like any other member of the congregation, and you bear witness to your son's wedding. Not to cause trouble, not to make a scene, just to exist, to be present. To remind everyone there that Daniel has a mother, and she's not ashamed of him even if he's apparently ashamed of her. I don't know, I said slowly, fear and hope warring in my chest. It feels wrong, sneaky, like I'm doing something underhanded. What's wrong and sneaky is a son excluding his mother from his wedding, Sarah said firmly, her lawyer voice coming out now, the voice she used when she was making a case she believed in completely. What's underhanded is pretending to have a fresh start, while cutting out the woman who gave you life and raised you and loved you unconditionally. You going to that church and sitting quietly in a pew? That's not wrong. Mama, that's you exercising your right to be present for your son, whether he wants you there or not. But what if I make things worse? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if showing up just pushes him further away? What if he's so angry that I came uninvited that he never speaks to me again? Sarah's expression softened. Mama, be honest. When was the last time Danny really spoke to you? When was the last time you had a real conversation with your son? How much further away can he get? At this point, what do you have to lose? She was right. God help me, she was right. I had already lost my son. He was already gone, already cut me out of his life. Showing up at his wedding couldn't make things worse than they already were. And maybe, just maybe, it might make him see what he was doing. Maybe seeing my face in that church would wake him up, would remind him of who he was and where he came from. I thought about it for days, then weeks. As June 20th crept closer and closer on the calendar, I agonized over the decision, praying about it, talking to Thomas's grave about it, weighing the options over and over in my mind. Michael and Sarah both continued to refuse to attend in solidarity with me, which meant that Daniel's own siblings, the people who'd grown up with him and loved him their whole lives, wouldn't be at his wedding. I wondered if that bothered him at all, or if Jennifer had convinced him that her family was enough, that he didn't need anyone from his past life. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made my final decision. I called Sarah and told her, my voice steady and clear for the first time in months. I'm going, not to cause a scene, not to ruin anything, but to be there as his mother, whether he wants me there or not. I'm going to hold my head high and sit in that church and bear witness to my son's wedding, because that's what mothers do. We show up, even when we're not wanted, even when it hurts, we show up. Good, Sarah said, and I could hear the fierce pride in her voice. Good, Mama, that's exactly what you should do. And you know what else you should do? You should wear something absolutely beautiful, something that makes you feel like the queen you are. Don't you dare show up in some old dress from the back of your closet. You go shopping and you find something spectacular, and you walk into that church with your head held high. So that's exactly what I did. Me, Margaret Rose Sullivan, 72 years old, widowed, heartbroken, and determined, I went shopping. I drove to the nicest department store in Cedar Rapids, and I walked through those doors like I was on a mission. I spent hours trying on dresses, looking at myself in the three-way mirrors, asking the saleswoman for her honest opinion. I finally found it, a champagne-colored dress, elegant but not flashy, with delicate beading on the bodice and a flowing skirt that moved beautifully when I walked. It was sophisticated and tasteful and expensive. It cost more than I'd spent on clothing in the past 5 years combined. But I didn't care. This was important. This was me reclaiming my dignity, my worth, my place in my son's life. I got my hair done the day before the wedding at the same salon where Betty had been doing my hair for 20 years. When I told her the whole story, about Daniel excluding me, about Jennifer's influence, about my decision to go anyway, she actually cried. Real tears streamed down her face as she worked on my hair, styling it into soft, elegant curls. You're a better woman than I'd be. Maggie, she said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. I'd be so tempted to stand up during that speak now or forever hold your peace part and give them all a piece of my mind. Tell everyone exactly what kind of man excludes his own mother from his wedding. My husband Thomas always told me that dignity was the one thing nobody could take from you. I said, watching her work, you had to give it away yourself, and I'm not giving mine away. Not for Daniel, not for Jennifer, not for anyone. I'm going to walk into that church with my head held high, and I'm going to show everyone there what grace looks like. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, in the room I'd shared with Thomas for nearly 50 years, and I could almost feel him there beside me. I talked to him like I often did when I needed guidance or comfort or just a sense of his presence. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Tom, I whispered into the darkness, my voice small and uncertain. Maybe I should just stay home. Maybe showing up will just make everything worse. Maybe I'm being selfish or vindictive or foolish. But honey, I'm his mother. Doesn't that count for something? Don't I deserve to be there for this moment, even if he doesn't want me there? I swear I felt him then, felt his presence as surely as if he were lying next to me, warm and solid and real. And I heard his voice in my head, as clear as if he were speaking out loud. You've got nothing to be ashamed of, Maggie. Not one single thing. You've been a wonderful mother, the best mother those kids could have asked for. You go to that church. You be there for our boy, even if he doesn't know he needs you. You show him what real love looks like, what real character looks like. Make me proud, Maggie. Not that you have to. You've been making me proud for 48 years. So on June 20th, 2015, I woke up early, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I took a long bath, soaking in the lavender bath salts Sarah had given me for Christmas, trying to calm my nerves. I did my makeup carefully, taking my time, making sure everything was perfect. I put on my new champagne dress and the pearl necklace Thomas had given me for our 25th anniversary. I slipped on my best shoes, and then I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and looked at myself. Really looked at myself for a long moment. I saw a woman who'd lived 72 years. A woman who'd been a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother, a grandmother. A woman who'd worked hard her whole life, who'd loved deeply, who'd suffered losses and celebrated joys. A woman who'd raised 3 children to the best of her ability and watched 2 of them thrive, while the third drifted away. And in that moment, looking at my reflection, I saw not just a grieving widow and a rejected mother, but a woman of strength and dignity and worth. A woman who had nothing to apologize for. A woman who deserved better than she'd been given, but who was going to hold her head high anyway. Sarah called me 3 times between when I woke up and when I left the house. "Are you okay? Are you sure you want to do this? Do you want me to come with you?" She was worried about me, protective of me, ready to be my champion if I needed her. "I'm okay," I told her, surprised to find that it was true. "I need to do this alone. This is between me and Daniel, but I love you for offering." Michael called too, his voice gruff with emotion. "Ma, if you need backup, if you need someone to stand beside you, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just say the word." "I know, baby," I said softly, "and I appreciate it more than you know, but I have to do this myself." The drive from Cedar Rapids to Des Moines takes about 2 hours under normal circumstances. I gave myself 2.5 hours, taking my time, not rushing, letting the Iowa landscape roll past my windows like a meditation. I listened to the oldies station on the radio, songs from my youth, songs Thomas and I used to dance to in our living room. The Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, Elvis. Each song a memory, each memory bittersweet. The wedding was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. I planned to arrive at 1:55, to slip into the back of the church right as things were starting, to find a seat and sit down and become part of the congregation, before anyone really noticed I was there. St. Catherine's Church was magnificent. I'd seen it before, of course, at Daniel's first wedding to Jennifer, but it struck me anew as I pulled into the parking lot. It was all stone and stained glass and soaring spires reaching toward heaven, the kind of church that cost millions of dollars and spoke of wealth and tradition and established respectability. Cars filled the parking lot, expensive cars, luxury vehicles, BMWs and Mercedes and Audis, the kind of cars Jennifer's family and friends would drive. I parked my modest 12-year-old Honda Accord at the far end of the lot, in the back corner where it wouldn't be so noticeable among all the luxury vehicles, and I sat there for a moment, gathering my courage, saying one last prayer. "Give me strength," I whispered. "Give me grace. Give me the courage to walk into that church and the wisdom to handle whatever happens. And please let this somehow bring me closer to my son instead of pushing him further away." Then I took a deep breath, checked my makeup one last time in the rearview mirror, and opened my car door. I walked across that parking lot like I was walking through fire, each step taking every ounce of courage I had, each step a conscious choice to keep moving forward instead of turning around and running away. People were filing into the church, women in designer dresses and elaborate hats, men in expensive tailored suits, everyone looking polished and prosperous and perfect. I recognized some of them from Daniel's first wedding. Jennifer's family and friends, people who'd barely acknowledged my existence back then and certainly wouldn't recognize me now. None of them looked at me as I walked past. Or if they did, they didn't see me, not really. I was just another older woman in a nice dress, presumably someone's aunt or family friend, unremarkable and unimportant. I reached the church doors just as the ushers were preparing to close them and direct any latecomers to wait until after the processional. One of them, a young man in his 20s who was probably one of Jennifer's cousins, started to step forward, probably to ask me where my invitation was, probably to check me against the guest list. But I just smiled at him, a kind, warm grandmother smile, and walked right past him into the sanctuary before he could form the words to stop me. The church was packed. Every pew seemed full, hundreds of people all dressed in their finest, all there to celebrate Daniel and Jennifer's fresh start. Their do-over wedding, their second chance at having the perfect ceremony that apparently their first wedding hadn't been. I stood at the back of the sanctuary, just inside the doors, scanning the rows of pews for an empty seat, for a space where I could slip in unnoticed. And then I saw him, my Daniel. He was standing at the front of the church with his groomsmen, looking impossibly handsome in his tuxedo. He was laughing at something someone had just said, his head thrown back, his face relaxed and happy and carefree, and my heart broke and swelled at the same time. That was my boy, my baby. The child I'd held in my arms 45 years ago, the boy I'd raised and loved and nurtured. And I wasn't supposed to be here watching him, but here I was anyway. Here I was, claiming my place as his mother, whether he'd invited me or not. I spotted an empty space in a pew about halfway up the aisle, on the bride's side, where Jennifer's family and friends were seated. I started to make my way toward it, moving slowly and carefully, trying not to draw attention to myself, trying to slip into that pew unnoticed. But then something happened that I didn't expect, something I could never have predicted or imagined in my wildest dreams. As I walked down that center aisle, a woman I didn't know, seated in the third row, looked up at me. Our eyes met and held for a moment. She was maybe 60 years old, elegant in a pearl gray dress with her silver hair perfectly styled, with kind eyes and a face that spoke of intelligence and compassion. And suddenly, inexplicably, she stood up, just stood up. I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe she needed to leave. Maybe she was headed to the restroom. Maybe she was making room for me to pass. But she didn't move aside. She didn't step into the aisle. She just stood there, tall and straight, looking at me with an expression of what I can only describe as respect, recognition, solidarity. And then the woman sitting next to her, someone who appeared to be her sister based on the family resemblance. She stood up too, and then the man across the aisle, an older gentleman with white hair and kind eyes, and then more people, and more, and more, like a wave moving through the church, like dominoes falling, like something orchestrated by an invisible hand. People began to rise from their seats, old and young, men and women, people I'd never met, people who didn't know me from Eve, strangers who had no idea who I was or why I was there. They stood up as I walked down that aisle, and the rustle of movement was like a whisper of fabric and humanity, like the flutter of angel wings, like the sound of justice being quietly served. I heard someone whisper, barely audible, "Is that his mother?" And someone else whisper back, "I heard she wasn't invited." And then the whispers spread like wildfire, rushing through the pews, person to person, row by row, a growing awareness of what was happening, of who I was, of the significance of my presence. That's his mother. His mother wasn't invited? Can you imagine? What kind of son doesn't invite his own mother to his wedding? That's terrible. How awful. Poor woman. By the time I reached that empty spot in the pew about halfway up the aisle, more than half the church was standing, not in protest, not in anger, not making a scene or causing disruption, just standing, bearing witness, acknowledging me, acknowledging that something deeply, fundamentally wrong was being made right, even if just for this one moment, even if just through this one simple gesture of respect and recognition. I slid into the pew, my hands trembling so badly I had to clasp them together in my lap to hide it, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone around me must be able to hear it. Slowly, one by one, the people around me sat back down too, but the whispers continued, softer now but still present, still spreading through the congregation like ripples in a pond. At the front of the church, Daniel had turned around. He'd seen the commotion, seen the wave of people standing, and now he was searching the crowd, confusion and concern on his face, trying to figure out what had caused the disruption, what had happened. When his eyes finally found me, when they locked onto my face sitting there in that pew halfway up the aisle, his expression changed instantly. All the color drained from his face. His mouth fell open. His eyes went wide with shock. I saw his mouth form the word mom, though no sound came out, though I was too far away to hear even if he had spoken aloud. I saw shock, confusion, disbelief, and something else flash across his face. Was it shame? Guilt? Fear? I couldn't quite identify it, couldn't quite read all the emotions warring in his expression. Jennifer's mother, Diane, sitting in the front row in all her designer glory, had turned around too. When her eyes landed on me, when she realized who had caused the disruption, her face flushed bright red with fury. She looked like she wanted to march back there and physically remove me from the church herself. She leaned over to whisper something urgent and angry to Jennifer's father, who also turned to stare at me with undisguised hostility, his jaw clenched and his eyes hard. But I sat there with my back straight and my head high, my hands folded demurely in my lap, and I didn't look away. I met their angry stares with calm dignity. I was his mother. I had every right to be here. They could glare at me all they wanted, but they couldn't make me feel ashamed for loving my son, for being present for this moment in his life. The organ music started then, deep and powerful and majestic, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin, that the processional was starting. Everyone's attention shifted from me to the back of the church, where Jennifer would be making her grand entrance. I could still feel people stealing glances at me, could still hear the whispers continuing in hushed tones, but the show had to go on. The wedding had to proceed. Nothing could stop it now, not even the shocking appearance of the groom's uninvited mother. Jennifer walked down the aisle on her father's arm, looking like something out of a fairy tale in a wedding dress that probably cost more than my car, maybe more than my house. It was all white silk and lace and crystals, with a train that stretched back 10 feet behind her, carried by 2 small flower girls who looked terrified of making a mistake. Jennifer's veil was elaborate and expensive, and through it I could see her face, beautiful and serene and focused entirely on Daniel waiting for her at the altar. She didn't look at me as she passed my pew. I don't think she could see me through her veil and her focus on Daniel and her determination to make this walk perfect. But her mother certainly looked at me, turning in her seat to shoot daggers at me with her eyes every few seconds, her face twisted with barely suppressed rage. The ceremony proceeded. The priest, a solemn man in his 60s wearing elaborate vestments, welcomed everyone and spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about love and commitment and family. And oh, the irony of that word, family, being spoken in a church where the groom had deliberately excluded his own mother. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing, or crying, or standing up and screaming at the hypocrisy of it all. When they got to the vows, Daniel's voice shook slightly. He kept glancing over to where I sat, like he couldn't quite believe I was really there, like he thought maybe if he looked away and looked back, I'd disappear, revealed as an illusion or a hallucination. Jennifer, either oblivious to the undercurrent of tension or simply determined to ignore it and have her perfect moment, smiled brilliantly and said her vows with the confidence and poise of a woman who always got exactly what she wanted, who had orchestrated this entire day down to the smallest detail, who wasn't about to let anything ruin her grand production. Then came the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The priest intoned in his deep, solemn voice, "If anyone here present knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The entire church held its breath. I swear you could have heard a pin drop. People actually turned to look at me, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all waiting to see if I would stand up, if I would speak, if I would object. If this was my moment to make a scene and tell everyone exactly what I thought of a son who excluded his mother. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stayed seated with my hands folded in my lap, my expression calm and serene, and I let the moment pass. This wasn't about ruining Daniel's wedding. This wasn't about revenge or causing a scene or embarrassing anyone. This was about being present, about refusing to be erased, about bearing witness to my son's marriage, as was my right and my role. Nothing more, nothing less. The priest waited a moment longer, then nodded and continued with the ceremony. They were pronounced husband and wife. They kissed, a long romantic kiss that made some people in the congregation sigh with happiness. The organ swelled with triumphant music, filling the church with glorious sound. And as Daniel and Jennifer turned to walk back down the aisle as a married couple, as they began their recessional walk, Daniel's eyes found mine again. I smiled at him, just a small, sad, gentle smile, a smile that said I loved him unconditionally, that I was proud of the man he'd become even if I was hurt by his choices, that I was his mother no matter what, that nothing could change that fundamental truth. And I saw tears spring to his eyes, saw his face crumple slightly with emotion before he quickly looked away, before Jennifer squeezed his arm and pulled him forward, forcing him to keep walking, to keep smiling, to maintain the illusion of the perfect happy couple on their perfect happy day. As they processed past my pew, Jennifer finally saw me. Her step faltered for just a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible unless you were watching closely. And I was watching very closely. Her face went from glowing, radiant bride to shocked and furious in an instant. Her eyes widened, her smile froze, her grip on Daniel's arm tightened visibly. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't make a scene in the middle of her grand exit. In the middle of this perfect moment she'd orchestrated so carefully. So she recovered quickly, fixed her smile back in place, and kept walking, gripping Daniel's arm tighter and tighter with each step. After they passed, as the wedding party followed them down the aisle, the groomsmen and bridesmaids all paired up and smiling. I stood with everyone else. And then, as people began to file out of the pews to head to the reception, I quietly slipped out a side door. I didn't go to the reception. That would have been too far. Truly crashing something I wasn't invited to, truly making a scene. I'd accomplished what I came to do. I'd been present for my son's wedding ceremony. I'd witnessed his marriage. I'd reminded him and everyone there that he had a mother who loved him. That was enough. That had to be enough. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying the ceremony over and over, especially that incredible moment when all those strangers stood up for me, when they recognized the injustice of a mother being excluded and they silently, powerfully took my side. I cried most of the way back to Cedar Rapids, tears streaming down my face unchecked. But they weren't all tears of sadness. Some of them were tears of pride, of relief, of a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had done it. I had stood up for myself. I had refused to be erased. And whatever happened next, I could live with that. Sarah and Michael were waiting at my house when I got home, both of their cars in my driveway, both of them sitting on my front porch watching for me. They'd been getting updates from friends of friends who'd been at the wedding, people calling and texting them about what had happened, about the uninvited mother who showed up and the standing ovation she received from half the congregation. The moment I got out of my car, they both rushed to me. Sarah threw her arms around me and held me tight, and I could feel her crying against my shoulder. "You did it, Mama. You actually did it. I'm so proud of you." "Tell us everything," Michael demanded, his voice rough with emotion, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. "What happened? What did Danny say? What did Jennifer do?" We went inside and I told them the whole story, every detail I could remember. I told them about walking into that church, about finding a seat, about how people started standing up one by one as I walked down the aisle. I told them about Daniel's face when he saw me, about Jennifer's fury, about sitting through the ceremony with my head held high. I told them about the smile I gave Daniel and the tears I saw in his eyes. People stood up for me, I said, still marveling at it, still trying to process what had happened. Complete strangers. They didn't know me, but they knew what was right. They knew a mother belongs at her son's wedding. They knew what Daniel and Jennifer did was wrong, and they stood up for me, because anyone with a shred of decency could see that you were treated horribly, Michael said fiercely, because even people who don't know you could recognize that you deserved better, that you deserved to be there. We didn't hear from Daniel that night, or the next day, or the day after that. A week passed in silence, then 2 weeks. I started to think that my gesture, rather than building a bridge, had burned it down completely. I started to worry that showing up at his wedding had been the final straw, that Daniel was so angry at me for coming uninvited that he would never speak to me again, that I'd lost him forever this time. But then 3 weeks after the wedding, on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-July when I was in my garden pulling weeds, I heard a car pull up in my driveway. I looked up, shading my eyes against the sun, and I saw Daniel's car. And then I saw Daniel himself climbing out, walking toward me. And the man I saw, no, not a man, a boy, because that's what he looked like in that moment, was broken. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. His face was pale and drawn. He had dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in weeks. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. He looked like his whole world had come crashing down. "Mom?" he said, and his voice cracked on the word, cracked and broke like glass shattering. "Mom, can I come in? Can we talk, please?" I stood up from my garden, brushed the dirt off my hands, and nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd start crying and never stop. We walked into the house together, and Daniel looked around like he was seeing it for the first time, or maybe like he was seeing it again after a long absence. He looked at the family photos on the walls, at the Afghan I'd crocheted draped over the couch, at the picture of his father on the mantel in his John Deere work shirt and his warm smile. And then Daniel just broke down, completely, utterly fell apart. He sank onto the couch and put his face in his hands and sobbed, like his heart was breaking, like something inside him had shattered beyond repair. I sat down next to him and did what mothers do. I put my hand on his back and rubbed small circles, just like I used to do when he was little, and had a nightmare or was upset about something. I didn't say anything. I just let him cry, let him get it all out, let him feel whatever he was feeling without judgment or interruption. "I'm sorry," he finally choked out between sobs. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. For the wedding, for not inviting you, for letting Jennifer convince me it was okay, for staying away all these years, for not being there when Dad was dying, for not being there after he died. I'm sorry for being the worst son in the world. I'm sorry for breaking your heart. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Shh," I said softly, still rubbing his back. "It's okay, baby. You're here now. That's what matters." "It's not okay," he said, looking up at me with devastated eyes. Eyes full of pain and regret and self-loathing. "Nothing about this is okay. Nothing about what I did is okay. I didn't invite my own mother to my wedding. My mother, the woman who gave birth to me, who raised me, who loved me unconditionally every single day of my life. What kind of monster does that? What kind of son am I?" "You're my son," I said simply, taking his hand in mine. "You're my Danny, and I love you. I've always loved you. I will always love you. That's never going to change, no matter what." "How can you say that?" he asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "How can you still love me after what I did to you? After how I've treated you?" "Because that's what mothers do," I said gently. "We love our children even when they make mistakes, even when they hurt us, even when they push us away. We keep loving them, and we keep hoping they'll find their way back." And then the whole story came pouring out of him. He told me everything about what happened after I left the church, how everyone at the reception had been talking about me, how person after person came up to them asking about his mother, asking why I wasn't in the family photos being taken, asking if it was true that I hadn't been invited, how Jennifer's own aunt, her father's sister, had pulled him aside and told him she was appalled that excluding his mother reflected poorly on his character, how people whispered and judged and made him feel ashamed. "And Jennifer got so angry," Daniel said. "She kept saying you'd ruined our day by showing up uninvited, that you'd turned everyone against us. And I listened to her saying these terrible things about you. And suddenly it was like I woke up. Because you didn't ruin anything, Mom. We ruined it ourselves. You were there. You were my mom, being there for her son like you've always been." He looked at me with tears streaming down his face. "That smile you gave me after the ceremony, it broke something open in me, made me see what I'd become." We talked for hours that day, rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was a start. Daniel and Jennifer divorced 4 years later. In 2019, he moved back to Cedar Rapids and met Amy, a kind school teacher who loved him for who he really was. They married in 2021 at the same church, but this time I walked him down the aisle with pride. Now at 81, I have 5 grandchildren from Daniel and Amy. They come over every Sunday for dinner, just like the old days. Where are you from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you love your grandma, if you've got a grandmother who's shown up for you time and time again, give this video a like. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories, and share it with your friends, especially if they need to hear that it's never too late to heal a broken relationship. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to love and be loved. We're all just trying to show up for the people who matter, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Thank you for listening to my story. You know, as I sit here sharing this with you, I think about all the mothers out there who are going through something similar. Maybe your child has drifted away because of a spouse who doesn't value family. Maybe you've been excluded from important moments in your child's life. Maybe you're wondering if you should keep trying or just give up. I want you to hear this. Don't give up. Keep the door open. Keep the light on, because you never know when that child might need to come home. I think about the woman I was on that day in June 2015, driving to Des Moines with my heart pounding and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I was terrified. I was hurt. But I was also determined, and that determination, that refusal to be erased, it changed everything. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. The journey from that church to today, to Sunday dinners with Daniel and Amy and my grandchildren, wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks. There were difficult conversations. There were moments when I wondered if the damage was too deep to heal. But we kept showing up for each other. We kept trying. We kept loving each other even when it was hard. And that's what I want you to take away from this story. That love is worth fighting for, That family is worth fighting for, that you are worth fighting for. Don't let anyone convince you that you're disposable or forgettable or not important enough. You matter. Your place in your family matters. Your love matters. So wherever you are right now, whatever you're going through with your own family, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are millions of us out there, mothers and fathers and children and siblings, all trying to navigate these complicated relationships, all trying to love each other despite our flaws and mistakes and misunderstandings. Keep showing up, keep loving, keep believing that redemption is possible, because it is. I'm living proof of that. God bless you all. And remember, you're stronger than you think you are.